we're going to talk about the power of organized interest. In other words, we're going to talk about politics, politicians, voters, and things like that. What is political economy? It's a branch of economics that studies government using tools from economics. Specifically, we're going to look at voters, special interest groups, and different voting models. And all of those, of course, is going to define politicians' behavior. So who are voters? Well, those people that vote. In other words, those who make collective decisions. We as a group of people have a right to make a collective decisions. We collectively make a decision by casting our votes. Sounds like a good idea. The problem was that voters have incentives to be ignorant. Voters have incentives to be free riders. There's not too many incentives for us in actually go and cast our votes. The reason for it is that getting information is costly. You have to listen to the news, maybe you have to watch some debates, maybe you have to read about politician policies, maybe you even want to know which policy is better policy because, as we said before, there's no such thing as common sense policy. So some people maybe need to read about costs and benefits of specific policies. And sometimes the cost of getting information outweighs the benefits of informed voting. So sometimes it takes a lot of time to actually learn about policies. So what do? We just vote as without that information. So we're not making a smart decision when we cast our vote. Why is it not a bad idea to be ignorant? Why is it, as we say, okay to be ignorant? When it comes to local issues, there's usually too many. When you go and cast your vote, there's so many issues where you have to pick yes and no, and they're usually worded in such a confusing way that it's almost impossible to figure out which issue you have to vote in which way. Some issues may not be too important to you personally, and that's okay, right? Sometimes you're voting on an issue whether or not a certain public school should be built. You're going to be taxed half a penny for each dollar, which is, you're not going to break your budget. And at the same, you don't have kids, so you don't really care about whether or not that school is going to be built. Some issues are not going to be related to you, similar to the previous example. Sometimes we may vote on whether or not we want to build a bike path. Well, you're not really caring about that much, so that issue is not related to you. Some policies are not very well explained. There's so many confusing policies, and they are with purpose worded in a certain way to make voters vote either one way or another way. So, depending on how we word the policy, we may convince voters to vote in a particular way. So, we're not trying to explain those policies on purpose sometimes. When it comes to national issues, those that we debate, but the presidents or presidential candidates debate about, once again, they may not be too relevant. To some people, it really doesn't matter what happens to the immigration reform. It doesn't concern many citizens what's going to happen to them. Some people are not concerned about whether or not a social security system is going to be solved because they're saving privately for their retirement. So some of the national issues may not be necessarily relevant to us. With national issues, there may be too much information. If you think back to the time when we have presidential election, how many ads are we being shown every single time there's a presidential election? And lucky for us, we live in Oklahoma, which mostly votes red, which means that we don't actually get as many advertisements as other state men. One time I went to Florida right after presidential election. You could definitely see that Florida was more important when it came to the presidential election than Oklahoma because there were so many billboards that talked about what candidate or another candidate. Once again, annoying ads, right? So we don't want to watch them, we don't want to learn anything from them, and quite frankly, we can't learn much from those. Another reason is your vote does not really matter. Even if it sounds really bad, even if it sounds really sad, but think about this. Last election, those of you that voted, if you didn't show up to the poll, would the result of an election be any different? Most likely not. For those of you who didn't show up to the polls, who didn't go and vote, think about if you did go and vote. Would the result of the election be any different? Once again, probably not. There's a very small, teeny tiny chance that your vote is actually going to matter. Maybe on some local issue in a city where there's only 1,000 residents, one of the residents may decide the outcome of that election. But in national elections, most likely, one single personal vote is not going to change the outcome of the election. When it comes to special interest groups, we say that the cost of some government action may be insignificant to majority of people. And the benefits of those are going to be concentrated among smaller groups. These groups is highly motivated to be informed about the issue, and most of the voters prefer to be rationally ignorant, meaning the voters who are going to vote on that issues are not really going to care about that issue, so they're not going to spend their time to actually figuring out whether or not it's important to vote yes or no. They're simply going to go by what their gut is telling them, or maybe what they just heard, without actually spending some time researching that issue. So when it comes to issues like that are not going to affect a large group of people, but the benefits are concentrated among the small groups of people, those smaller groups have a lot of incentives to organize and lobby for that issue to be voted on. If you think about it, there's a total of 35,000 registered lobbyists in the United States. Those that go to politicians and try to convince them to vote either one way or another way. And there's only 100 senators and 435 House representatives. So you can see amount of those people who are trying to convince senators and House representatives to vote in a certain way is very, very large. So the chances are those small group of people most likely will get what they actually want because they're very motivated by getting what they want. Just a side question. Do you know among those 100 senators and 435 House representatives, how many economists actually making decisions about our economy? I believe right now there's only 2 of those people are actually economists. So whenever economists get blamed for bad economic situation in the United States, think about this. We may just give an advice, but it doesn't mean that those senators, House representatives, and higher elected officials would actually listen to that. But back to the special interest groups, back to those lobbies. As we said, those costs are going to be spread among many, many people. So this one inefficient policy that could cost much more than we benefit from it may not hurt the economy. But too many inefficient policies will waste taxpayers' dollars. That's why we say that the special interest groups, those people that lobby for certain policies, they may hurt our economy. Because most of the time you have to lobby for the inefficient policy that benefits only a small group of people. So it's not going to be sustainable to pass policies that have higher costs than the benefits. Yet, many policies like that are implemented. Many times, politicians decide to go ahead with the policies that benefit small group of people and the costs are going to be spread around many other people. Why? Well, I'm going to let you watch the following video and you will see why.